What can the past teach us about what we're dealing with today? Our guest is Tim Kiska from the Detroit History Podcast, who recently put out a special episode talking about the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic and how it hit Detroit. And you know, it's uncanny how many echoes there are today when it comes to the coronavirus that are from a century ago. This is your Daily Detroit for Monday, May 11th, 2020. I'm Jer Stays, and joining me for the conversation will be Sven Gustafsson. But first, a quick thanks to our members on Patreon, including Francis, who joined us since we last talked, along with Colin, April, and others at patreon.com/dailydetroit. You all are helping push Detroit's conversation forward, and thank you very much. All right, let's get started. Joining us on the line is Tim Kiska. He is a professor at the University of Michigan Dearborn and also the voice behind the Detroit History Podcast, one of my favorite local listens. Welcome to Daily Detroit, sir.
Thank you for the invite. Appreciate it.
So what caught my ear was your most recent special episode talking about the Spanish flu in Detroit. I thought it was very illuminating to see how so many things feel like they're repeating themselves and feel like, you know, there are lessons that we can always learn from history. I mean, I don't know if it repeats itself, but I guess the saying is that it does rhyme, right?
Yeah, that's the old Mark Twain line. It rhymes. Yes, it does.
So what got you into looking at what we were dealing with at that time in our history? I mean, it literally claimed one of our automotive scions and one of the Dodge brothers.
Yeah, exactly. You know what it was? I was researching something else, and I ran across this stuff in 1918, 1919 in the Free Press and the news about these horrific conditions. We're talking ambulances taking whole families to the hospital, Ford Motor Company loaning out dozens of cars because there weren't enough ambulances to get people there. And I thought, oh my God. And I sort of kept it in the file. And then as this stuff started rolling out here in March, I thought, wow, we've been on this pony before. And so I wanted to just sort of backtrack to find out, how did it roll out in 1918, 1919, 1920? And is there anything at all applicable to what's going on today? And that's how I got into it.
Tim, the Spanish flu didn't originate here in Detroit, but obviously made its way to the city. I was reading, actually, there's some disagreement about where exactly it originated, whether it was in Europe or there was an article on the Smithsonian that posits that it actually began in rural Kansas. But anyway, when exactly did it first make its presence known here in Detroit?
Well, we're talking about the spring of 1918 in through there. And, you know, talking about that Smithsonian thing, yeah, there are all kinds of theories, but some people think it kind of started in Fort Riley in an army base in Kansas, and they were shipping people off to World War I, and of course everybody's living in trenches, and it just went crazy. It started making the way here in spring of 1918, and even then they weren't keeping numbers because this mysterious thing was killing people. And by the way, here's how it went, not to destroy anybody's day listening to your podcast, but basically you wake up, you'd get really sick, your face would turn black or blue, and you'd be dead by the end of the day. So this was not good. And it came back again in the fall of 1980. In other words, spring, they were puzzled by it. They didn't know what was going on, but something awful had just happened. Then in the fall, we're talking right around September 1918, it started coming back again. And they tried to shut the city down in areas of the state. And they got pushback on that, by the way. They did close the city for a couple of weeks. And we're talking September of 1918. Well, November 11th, 1918. End of World War I. Okay, we're going to have a big celebration, which we did in this town because, hey, the end of war. Well, everybody pours out in the street, and that makes it even worse. People really start getting sick. We're talking 1,800 deaths in the fall. And then it came back again the next year. And then the final wave was January, February of 1920. And that's the one that killed one of the Dodge brothers that you just referenced a second ago. So it came back. People thought it was done, and it turned out it was not. And, I'm not an epidemiologist, but a number of epidemiologists are saying this could well happen with this one, where it'll return in waves. Good God, I hope that's not something we have to look forward to, but you sort of wonder if that's in the cards for us.
it just struck me the similarities with things. If you think about the waves, you think about a lot of the pushback of the economy and all of those things. I felt like we were just in the same boat all over again.
Oh, yeah, for certain. In a lot of ways, we're not. In terms of medical science has certainly been, advanced. But another X factor, and I think the two of you would have a really interesting perspective on this, the difference between 1918 and now. 1918, it was 2 years before radio really started getting a toehold. Obviously, no internet. Obviously, no cable TV. Obviously, no over-the-air TV. No social media, right? All you had is the newspapers. Now, I think that it's really in everybody's face. And what was curious about 1918, 1919, there was a big meeting with all the city leaders, and they were saying, wait a minute, if we close this town down, people are going to get hysterical, and that's going to make it worse. I can only imagine what that same group would think when it is so in your face, it's everywhere to the point where people are just turning off the TV, turning off the web. You sort of wonder what that's going to mean, long term. And I'm not smart enough to have an answer.
It kind of strikes me that it's very possible the disease could outpace the media at that time.
Yeah. Oh, very much so. But it did flip people out. There's another X factor is, this was not the first time something like this would happen. You used to have outbreaks of different kinds of flu, measles, tuberculosis was a thing. So, back in 1918, 1919, 1920, I think people were saying, well, this is really bad. Yes, it's awful, but we've kind of been here before. I don't think this one in 2020 is something that registers in people's brains. There have been other flus that have hit this country and the world in the last 20 years, but not quite like this.
Well, and thanks to vaccines and modern medicine, there's a bunch of scourges that used to be everyday occurrences, even, within our lifetimes that, are gone. I mean, I know you're a little bit older than we are, sir, and I'm sure you can remember some of those things.
Polio.
Yeah.
Polio. I remember as a kid that, it was something that it wasn't in the center of my consciousness, but it was something that, you'd see. I mean, I was friends with kids that gotten that, were walking around with braces and things like that. And now that's, kind of unimaginable, at least in this era, in this country.
Going back to, what you said about the resistance to, shutting down the economy and everything. I mean, obviously we're seeing a backlash kind of starting to form here, right? I mean, we've seen protests in Lansing and other state capitals. There are lawsuits against the governor. Are there echoes from back 100 years ago during the Spanish flu as well?
Oh, yeah, there are some echoes. It was a little bit different, though. Back then, the governor was a guy named Albert Sleeper, and he'd say, look, let's close the state down. Or you should close down. It was a recommendation. And a whole lot of places just said, no, just not going to do it. Doesn't seem like that's an option this time around. And if I could add one thing to your excellent question, I have a deli shop at the end of my block. This woman has been cutting sandwiches on the board there for 20 years, and this business is just it's on the ropes. And I remember going in for a sandwich about 2 weeks ago, and she said, this whole thing's it's baloney, it's a hoax. And I said, Jesus, not a hoax. I mean, I've lost 3 people to this. 3 of my friends have died, Mm-hmm. And she said, well, did they have underlying conditions? And I said, well, yeah. And she says, well, there. Well, so you could step back and say, well, this woman's insane. But the answer is no. I mean, you would starting to behave badly if you saw 20 years of your life just kind of go poof like this. So my concern, what I think about is, okay, how is she going to react where we open up again and she's going okay for about a month, 2 months, 3 months, and then they close it down again. And then they open it up again and they close it down yet again. Yeah, I don't know. You guys have been around the block as much as anybody. How do you think people are going to react to that? It's a scary thought.
I've thought about that myself because I think there is a cognitive dissonance for a lot of folks because it has been so long since we've had a shared threat like this. I mean, we've lost more people in this country than we did during the Vietnam War. And so I don't think that it's something that registers with folks. And I think the other insidious part about this is so I live in the city of Detroit. I live, a mile north of the Fisher Building. One of the things is that I have neighbors that we have lost. I have friends we have lost. I have taken the dog on walks. I have seen the ambulance pick up people out of their homes, so it's very, very real. This is when it was in the peak. Fortunately, things have kind of, gotten a hold of things here in the city a bit. Hopefully that holds. But especially early on, and there was this belief that it wasn't real. I would see people in the park without masks or playing basketball. And then there was a realization that hit among everybody here that this is no joke, because so many people started to unfortunately leave us. And what I fear is the cognitive dissonance. And I know this is somebody who's been sharing this story every single day on our podcast. The cognitive dissonance of it's just a number. I've noticed with listeners too, that people don't seem to realize this is real. Like there's a good chunk of people that don't realize this is real until it personally touches them. And by that time, it's too late.
That's right. Exactly. And then you make a very good point. You still get people saying, okay, it's the media just blowing this thing out of proportion. You get that all the time. And I don't know what you say. I just don't know what you say to that. But you're right. There's this major cognitive dissonance that it's not hit people, that this is no joke.
Yeah, and along those same lines, too, if I may just kind of offer, listening to your episode, Tim, it struck me that 100 years ago when the Spanish flu was arriving and raging and everything, I mean, people who went through that period and subsequent periods, polio and World War II and everything, they know what it means to live with sacrifice. Like we're all learning this right now. I mean, this is brand new to us. We've never, we grew up in a land of plenty in the, greatest country in the world, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're learning to deal with sacrifice. I mean, you think back 100 years ago, there was, as you said, no radio yet, no television. So information spread relatively slowly compared to now. There was interesting details you shared about the number of hospitals in the city. I mean, medical science was certainly nowhere near as advanced as it is now. I'm sure a lot of people lived back then, even probably still without electricity or refrigeration in the city and so forth. I mean, this is not to belittle anybody's sacrifice. I mean, especially the business owners, the deli owner that you mentioned, but like people are now complaining about not being able to get their hair cut and stuff. I mean, it's a remarkable sort of divide. Exactly.
You hit on a key point there is, we've been, for the most part, pretty lucky dealing with adversity. I mean, the 2008, 2009 recession was very bad. Early 80s, that was no walk in the park either. But I think about my own late father. His dad was a coal miner, dies in 1931, leaving 8 kids behind under the age of 16. No social safety net. So no Social Security, nothing. And so there's my grandmother, widowed with 8 kids, and good luck with that. They kind of got through. I mean, but what I'm saying is just anybody who's lived with it, I'm old enough to, know people that have lived through the Depression. They might have been kids at the time, but they were scarred by the whole thing. The deprivation, even in this country in World War II, where there were rations on almost all kinds of things. We've been blessed. And I think you make a key point, which is we're kind of not used to this. I'm not criticizing our culture, but our culture is give it to me now. There's somebody who does a great stand-up about Amazon Prime. I want a pen. I want a blue pen, and I want you to put it in my hand in the next 2 hours, and we're sort of used to everything now. We're not used to, things are not going to go our way for a while.
Well, and this whole situation, for me personally, my father was born at the beginning of the Depression. My parents had me later in life. So my father was born early in the Depression, and then my mom was born just before World War II. And I was raised a lot by my grandmother, who was born in 1909.
Ah, okay. So she saw it.
Yeah, they all saw things like this. I remember growing up, talking to them and them constantly reinforcing. And it was almost something where I felt like a lack of kinship with my people of my own generation, because, basically I was raised by my grandparents and great grandparents of most of my friends, right? Because most of my friends were a generation earlier. And it was always this kind of, I don't want to say it's sadness, but like a grounding of this. We should be very thankful for what we have, because this can and will, it will. I remember these words from Grandma Martha. This will go away for a while. It'll come back, but understand it is human history that you're going to lose this for a while. And it always kind of steeled my resolve and made me think about how thankful to be of like the little things that we have, because she would remind me of all the things they did not have raising my father. And, my grandfather died of pneumonia when my dad was a child. Like, you can't even think of people dying of pneumonia nowadays, but they didn't have any way to fight it. It was a death sentence.
All right. Yeah, exactly.
I didn't want this to ever happen, ever. But grandma was right.
Your grandmother was a smart person, sounds like. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and people walk around with that wounds for the rest of their life. I had what would have been my dad's oldest sister who lived out in California, and I think she had saved her money like crazy, and she was probably a couple $1 million worth of stock certificates. She didn't trust the bank. She drove around with those stock certificates in the trunk of her car, and you'd think, well, how crazy is that? And if I asked her, she, which I never did, I never had the guts to ask her, but she would say, "Oh, putting your money in the bank, I saw what happened once. How crazy is that? So I'll put it in the trunk." So I mean, she walked around with that wound for the rest of her life, and then so you're right. We're lucky, in a lot of ways.
What would you say is your big takeaway from doing this episode and doing all this research about the Spanish flu of 1918? What did you learn that's relevant to what we're dealing with now?
Well, I think the first thing was the waves. I kind of, we're starting to talk a little bit about this early on because I started working on this podcast maybe mid to late March and through there, starting doing heavy research on this thing. And I was somewhat surprised that it kept on coming back. Well, now I think in the last 2 to 3 weeks, you're starting to hear a lot more of that kind of talk from folks. So that was one surprise. I was only vaguely aware that it got one of the Dodge brothers. And I thought, well, if anybody would be immune, it would be the Dodge brothers who were, almost as rich as Henry Ford, well, now it got them, or got one of them. And then the second one kind of indirectly it got them. So I think that was the takeaway. The other takeaway was I thought, wait a minute, the pushback about closing things down. I thought, and this is, I put this together right before the guys showed up with the guns on the state capitol. But I'm thinking, they were thinking that way back then as well. So that was a surprise. And I think the biggest surprise was everybody pouring out in the streets the day after Armistice Day. And I'm thinking these folks were walking out there, tens of thousands of them, not realizing that they were walking into a death trap. That was the big takeaway for me, that, oh my God, that happened. So that surprised me.
Zooming out, what got you into doing this podcast? Because it really is a great work of journalism and history to really revisit so many of these moments of our local history. What got you into this?
I'm talking to two of the Picassos of the podcast world, so I sort of feel a little bit funny, but the podcast is such a great way of telling a story, and so I'd said, okay, I'm going to take this, whatever research I can dredge out, just put it into a 20-minute or so. I can't remember what did this run, 22 minutes, something like that, 20-minute, podcast, just sort of laying it out. Unfortunately, I wish, it was 1918, 1920. There was no way of getting any real audio. So I had Christy McDonald from Detroit Public TV reading from the pages of the Detroit Free Press, as this thing is unraveling. But I got into it because, okay, this is a great story to tell about what happened. And the podcast is a great way of telling a story. I mean, this is a medium that's just tailor-made for that sort of thing. So that's kind of what got me into it, more than anything else.
I saw that the Spanish flu episode was the first one you'd done for, I think, close to a year. And I know some of your listeners are wondering the same thing, is that, are you going to keep doing them? Are you going to keep doing new episodes?
Oh boy. Yeah. Right now I'm neck deep.
You're on the spot.
Yeah. No, I mean, by the end of the month is what we're shooting for. And I think we better hit it, one way or the other. But yeah, we're putting together another. God, I sound so pompous when I say, well, another season like this is HBO. But we got another season of 10 coming up, and we've gotten 5 of them completed so far. We just want 1 or 2 more before we start rolling these things out weekly. So I'm thinking this is, a third of the way through May, roughly, certainly before the end of the month. We've got a number of them done. One on the history of jazz in this town. We've got that put together. We've got another one on a guy named David Marinus. I don't know if he's on your radar. He wrote a really great book about his dad in the McCarthy era here in Detroit. Lost his job at the Detroit Times for allegedly being a communist. We got that one done. We've got another one on an old radio station called WABX, which in the late 60s was the station where if you wanted to listen to Jimi Hendrix, that's what you're listening to. So that one's done. So we've got that one done, and we've got a few others, pieces on the garage floor for a number of the others. So by the end of the month, you're going to start seeing them weekly. My son would have a heart attack if he heard this and saying, I'd like to get 12, but let's shoot with 10. Let's start with 10. So we're definitely good for 10. And, it's the same thing. I'm somewhat embarrassed that we've not gotten this out earlier, but
life intervenes, but that's fantastic news nonetheless. Best news I've heard all day.
And it's great to see more getting added to the catalog. And what's great is that they're timeless. You can go back and you can really enjoy this, in many of the like truly podcasty ways, like we're a daily podcast, so we're more on like the update end. But I mean, you're really into those roots of like the narrative story and all of those things. And it's just great to listen. I'm so excited to hear about this third season. And I encourage folks to check it out at DetroitHistoryPodcast.com. They are on Apple Podcasts and the things. And, we will make sure to include a link into the show notes. And I am so glad, Tim, that you spent some time with us today and talked about your most recent episode and spent some time with us here on Daily Detroit.
Well, no, thank you so much for the invite, and I appreciate the work you guys do. I mean, because it's a great addition to this, the discourse in this town. It's a great thing. So, and I know it ain't easy. I know what you guys have to go through to make it good. So, my hats off to you for your excellent work.
Here are a couple things before we go today.
I heard Eminem doing 250, so I wanted to contribute even more to Detroit. So I'm going to match him 750. So we're going to make it a cool $1 million to his foundation.
So that's $1 million.
So that he can help as many people as possible.
That's the voice of Jack Dorsey, co-founder of Twitter, on the Young Money radio show hosted by Lil Wayne. Dorsey and local superstar Eminem are funding together $1 million of programs in Detroit, where there have been about 10,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 as of this recording. The work will be done through Eminem's Marshall Mathers Foundation. Their work focuses on disadvantaged and at-risk youth in our area. And Mackinac Island, one of the favorite vacation spots of Metro Detroiters for many, many years, has pushed back their opening yet again. A report in the Detroit Free Press says that the Grand Hotel, with the world's longest porch and the most rooms on the island, will not reopen until June 21st. I'll have a link in the notes, but it shows just how much some people are chomping at the bit to get things open again, and others unsure if it's even safe to do so. And we're done for today. Thanks so much for listening to Your Daily Detroit. A reminder that we are people-powered. You can join those people at patreon.com/Daily Detroit, and it's greatly appreciated. With that, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this together.